Welcome back. You're watching Insight. And Insight today we are discussing the relevance of Asia-Africa Conference, which is also known as the Bandung Conference, and what's in store for the countries in these continents. So in our final segment, let's try and understand India's Africa policy and how good our relations have been with countries in Africa. Bringing you Ms. Berry here again. How good is India-Africa ties, and also what's at stake for us? Because if you compare trade and investment, $70 billion in 2013 with India's exports touching $27 billion and imports $43 billion. But if you compare this with China-Africa trade, it is somewhere around $211 billion in 2013. So where are we as far as trade and investment is concerned?
I think it would be wrong to compare India and China, and then India's engagement with Africa, I think, is unique and it's historic. We've been engaging African countries since the ancient times. The cooperation between Aksum dynasty in Ethiopia and India is well known. So the first point I would like to make is that it is historic. And secondly, I think India's cooperation with Africa has evolved. It is not just limited to trade ties. What India is trying to do in Africa is something different. It is building a relationship which is focusing on capacity building and human resource development.
But do you think we have a coherent?
We are setting up.
Do you think we have a coherent and consistent policy towards Africa? Because there are many who say that there are too many actors involved and it's highly incoherent and chaotic, and we don't really know how to engage with African countries.
Yeah, first of all, I think we have to realize that Africa is not a monolith. As the earlier participant has said, there are 54 countries there in Africa. What we did was, in the past, we've now evolved this policy of a forum summit, where we were engaging African countries through a forum, and primarily the partner here was the African Union. Though we are also engaging them regionally through the various regional organizations. There are 6 of them in Africa, and also bilaterally. But the forum summit was primarily through African Union. But now the forthcoming summit, which is going to take place in October, we have changed that, and we've invited the entire African continent. All the 54 countries have been invited to take part in the conference. So that's a difference. But what I was trying to say earlier, the type of engagement that India is involved in, it is focusing on human resource development and sharing India's development experience.
Right, so focusing
India
more.
is trying to help countries in setting up institutions of various kinds.
Right, I'll just bring in Ambassador Tayal here. India's Africa policy, can we do any better? Ms. Berry is saying that focuses more on human resources. It's a very historic relationship between India and Africa and cannot really be compared. But overall, what's your assessment? Is our policy very coherent, consistent with Africa?
The policy has been consistent in its intentions and in its pronouncements. But ultimately, the great failing of our country is that there is such a gap between promises and performance, whether it is Africa, whether it is Myanmar, whether it is any other country. So the fault, dear Brutus, is within ourselves. And but investment has been growing. We have to bring in private sector, because otherwise the economic relationship will not grow. It is growing with South Africa, Nigeria, Angola. We will need to be selective. All the 53, of course, should be invited, and they should be treated as equal. But when we really have a policy which is realistic, we should identify half a dozen countries, 10 countries, focus more on them, invest more, have more kind of strategic relationship, and a holistic.
And when we talk about the Bandung Conference, can we really live by the Bandung principle? Because can we really implement it in the present contemporary scenario? How far that can be done?
I think the Bandung conference is more commemorative. It is a nice place to have a party, say some announcements and make some goody things you say. But as far as future direction or any activity is concerned, I don't think much is going to come out of it. And whatever it is, the agenda will be set by China.
Okay, well, the agenda will be set by China. Mr. Kapoor, you know, Sukarno's opening speech at the Bandung conference in 1955, he said that let a new Asia and new Africa be born. So, 60 years later, are we really seeing a new Africa and new Asia?
I don't agree with the uncharitable views of Ambassador Dayal. I think the Bandung spirit works all the time, because if you look, it was based on Panchsheel between agreement which took place between Nehru and Zhou Enlai.
In 62, China attacked India.
No, that apart, but I'm talking about the spirit. I mean, in
Right.
terms of respecting each other's sovereignty, respect for human rights, and other issues which I think are the
Good on paper, difficult to implement? Good on
difficult to
paper.
implement primarily because the global order is loaded towards the West, and there's been rather unjust.
That's what I'm saying. Many
and
of our
if
global
must-
problems, you can find
must
solutions
remember,
for that.
In 1955, the Bandung conference was being sabotaged by the West and by the Americans in such a way they did not want. They wanted to curb the communist influence. That was how it was working. So at that point of time, when Nehru was trying to bring in Zhou Enlai and trying to provide some kind of space, and talking about even Palestine, which remains the only country which hasn't got independence. In fact, in Bandung, there'll be a march in which 107 countries are going to participate in favor of Palestine.
Right.
So it's there is so much symbolism in that. So when President Sukarno was talking about a new Asia, a new Africa, it's a vision that the countries can go forward. Although there is so much of violence and there's so much wrong that is taking place. I mean, before I came here, I saw the tragedy which is unfolding in Mediterranean. People dying in Libya, so many of them who want to cross over, and the international community, especially the European Union, which remains little fortress that they have created. They don't want anybody to come in and destroy or spoil.
Even the
their
Indonesian
party.
president yesterday said that governments must come together to tackle the challenge of Palestine and what's really happening in Palestine.
So these are the
sort of
issues.
occupation.
So you can't have a new Asia, new Africa when you have so much of pain and suffering which has actually increased in the last 8 or 10 years.
Right, and all the countries cannot really work in isolation. They have to come together. When
They
you're
have
talking
to
of
come together. They have to express resolve in certain ways, and 107 countries
Right,
coming
but
together.
India's stake in the Bandung conference and also India's policy towards Africa, because if you talk about India-Africa ties, we just heard Ms. Berry from IDSA, and she said that India and Africa share historic ties.
That is true. India is a natural partner of every African society has an Indian presence. It becomes so easy for Indian government to, if they have an agenda, to leverage the presence of the Indians in Africa, do many things. But we have failed, primarily because we are a poor country. We are more inward looking. It becomes very difficult to follow China or do things that Chinese are doing. We try to do that. I mean, when the economy was roaring, Indian economy is going at 8 or 9%. We had a credit line of about $5 billion in the last African Union, where I was there in Addis Ababa, and it was put out for many countries. But how do we execute? As Ambassador Dayal was saying, it leaves a lot to be desired. We promise and we can't deliver. So if you go around in African countries, they will tell you about wonderful promises various Indian governments and heads of states have actually done, and nothing has shown on the ground.
So are we saying China will set the agenda for Africa and not India? Because even if you look at trade and investment between India and Africa is way lower, $90 billion target in 2015, but overall we've seen $210 in 2013 for China. So it's way ahead than what actually India is doing with Africa.
I don't think it is, money only matters. We have a big reputation in Africa. We have supported their struggles, and throughout the Cold War era, India provided a leadership also, supported their struggle, be it apartheid or any other, problems, Mrs. Gandhi used to lead that movement, India played a very important role, not only there, but also in Asia and Latin America, the non-aligned movement. We were poor at that time, but we were very important leaders of the world, India dominated in international politics even at that time, No, there is another thing, there is a desire now, Bandung is just a beginning.
Right.
The second, the spirit is there that there is a need for Asia and Africa come together, There are too many problems which Africa is facing. They believe, these problems, only these people can solve, the countries of this region. We have technology, This region has technology, resources, everything is available, you know. Yet there is not unity. There are many problems countries are facing, you know. So the idea is, you know, to come together and multipolar world, you know, this can be solved, you know. It is just a beginning.
And maybe
you know.
that's why the larger theme of the Bandung conference is also South together for greater
one
unity
thing, you
and
know,
prosperity.
But,
yes.
yeah, but one thing, you know, without India this grouping cannot work.
Okay.
Because, you know, Japan and China have very little credibility in Africa. And many countries in Asia.
I'll take final comments on the program. I'll start with you, Ms. Berry. Can Asian and African countries, do you see a possibility of they reviving their 1950s solidarity? And if yes, then what will be the challenges for them in days to come?
I think it is possible. It is possible that we can revive some kind of cooperation. It may not be the same as that in 1955. But first we'll have to put our heads together and look at what all can we do together. I mean, it is true that China is kind of, you know, trying to lead the two continents. But India is also very much close in the heart and mind of the people in Africa and in Asia. In Africa in particular, the African countries realize that India is the only country which has shared technology with the African countries, and this is not true of any other country in the world. So I think India has done something which is unique, and but it needs to deliver its promises. So if it wants to take ownership of Africa-Asia cooperation, then it needs to put its you know, priority in developing a roadmap of the cooperation. But with the fact that our Prime Minister is not even there at Bandung, I think that shows that India is not really that much interested in taking on a leadership.
Okay, so you're saying the fact that Prime Minister is not attending the Bandung conference, more or less saying that India is not really prioritizing its ties with Africa. But then let's see how things really shape up, because more or less, as you rightly pointed out, India and Africa.
In terms of leadership, but
yes.
So I'm not saying that it is not prioritizing Africa's relations with India, but it's not taking on the leadership of India, of Africa-Asia cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Berry.
Right,
thank you very much, Ms. Berry, for joining us in this program. And coming back to you, Ambassador Tayal, overall, do you see a strong possibility of Asian and African countries coming together through this Bandung conference and reviving that solidarity which we actually witnessed in the 1950s?
You know, again, I'll say solidarity for what? Because 1955 decolonization, your countries were just becoming independent.
Solidarity for, you know, fighting poverty, for fighting human rights
so
abuse,
what is stopping
terrorism.
them? They don't need solidarity. They have to look at themselves. They cannot blame anybody. India cannot blame anybody. We have been independent for 70 years now. So if we are poor, we have to blame ourselves. So solidarity against whom? For what? It can be very good a concept that just fight poverty, fight employment or unemployment, etc. But in what way? What is stopping them to fight? What is standing in the way? So I am not at all clear that what is the agenda of this Bandung conference.
Okay, and you're not very optimistic about it. Very clear. Okay, final comments from you, Mr. Kapoor.
I think what will really happen is that it will be a new world order where China will be sitting on top, and that is what will be the outcome. So time and again this message will go out, although people go back remembering what happened in 1955 and move on to other things, but it will seal the primacy of China in the new world order.
Seal the primacy of China in the new world order, the way it is actually being
there. I'll just like to add one word. In when 2005, when the 50th anniversary of Bandung took place, there was a new Asian-African strategic partnership, and the co-chair for that were Indonesia and South Africa.
Right.
I would very much like to see that what emerges and who is the co-chair.
Right. Okay. Final comments from you, Mr. Aga.
I think there is a tremendous desire between the people of Asia and Africa to come closer, you know. Solidarity, and otherwise we have maintained historical ties, you know. Not only India, these two regions, you know, have always been together, you know. So there is a need, and there is a desire, you know, of, you know, new international order, you know, reform in United Nations Security Council. They want a membership, and and a multipolar world is emerging. So these are the things, you know.
And it is important for India to also
it's also
prioritize
very-
Africa.
I think India has spent a lot of time, you know, dealing with the Western nation in the post-Cold War era. We saw, you know, and now India is realizing the importance of Africa and other countries of the Asia or the South Asia or regional countries. You know, this realization is coming. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe more. I
And
hope
we, with the new government, Ambassador Tayal, you think that the government is very proactive on, as far as the foreign policy is concerned? You know,
I
the
think
government doesn't
is
really have much.
proactive. Government is very realistic. The
Okay.
Prime Minister has not gone for this conference.
The government is
Because
very religious, highly pessimistic.
I have worked at
You
UN
are-
division,
okay.
and I have seen too many totally sterile conferences. So I really don't expect
one
much to
should
come out
not
of it.
go to this conference alone.
Okay.
This is just a platform. It's just the beginning, you know.
But I personally feel that this conference actually
It is a mistake.
needed Prime Minister Modi's presence. He was going there. I think the
Yes,
advice,
sure.
that the input that he got, that he should not go, is something that somebody needs to investigate, because I think we've lost out on a huge responsibility or huge opportunity.
Okay, you're calling it
do
a huge
many
opportunity lost when China's President Xi
Not
Jinping
only
is-
just China, but reaching out to countries that he's not been able to do.
Okay.
Because there are only few countries
Yeah,
that he has
networking part,
visited.
yes,
The
sure,
networking part is very important. He's not been to
That is important.
the Indonesian president, who is considered to be Indonesia's Kejriwal,
Right.
a person with very humble origin, supposed to be very dynamic. He would have got a
Okay, so
chance.
it was an opportunity
That
for
I
Prime
agree.
Minister Modi
On
to
that I agree.
connect
Maritime
and
neighbor,
network.
maritime neighbor, just about 100 kilometers away
Okay,
from us.
completely out of time.
So
Thank you very
networking,
much.
yes, but not.
Missed on networking, but then you are saying attending Bandung conference is not really important. Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Tayal, Mr. Kapoor, and also Aga sir, for joining us in this program. And that's all we have for you in this edition of Inside. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.